Good morning to you. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Gillian Keegan earlier on. How do you think the campaign has gone?
I've rather enjoyed it. It's nice to have a general election in the summer as opposed to the winter. My hopefully returned constituents, or the other way around, I should say, if I'm returned as the MP, have been delightful to talk to. And I've had the good fortune of being across the country supporting Labour candidates fighting to win their local elections. And we've got a very strong offer from the Labour Party, an offer of change for a decade of national renewal. And we're nearly near the finish line, and we've all been working so hard. So we're very grateful to get to it next Thursday.
All rosy then. Are you grateful in some ways to the Conservatives who seem to be plagued by issue after issue during the campaign? And if the polls are to be believed, you just need to sit back and carry on as you were?
No. I have a very strong view on that point because polls are just polls. If people want change in this country, they have to vote for it next Thursday. The only poll that matters is polling day. And so I would say to any voter across the country to look at your Labour candidate in your constituency. And if you want an end to these 14 years of chaos from the Conservatives, if you want to ensure we're not going to have another 5 years of chaos from a Conservative government, then pick up your photo ID, get to the ballot box and vote Labour. That's the only way to secure change, by doing so next Thursday.
We will know a week today whether or not you've been successful. Let's imagine you are. Let's believe those polls for a second. What is life going to be like under a Labour government? Because we hear today that migration could well be going up through the summer, regardless of who's in government, and perhaps even because of a Labour government, and cancelling the Rwanda plan means more migrants trying to travel here illegally will be emboldened. There isn't any money in the coffers, and you're going to be in the Treasury if that is the case. So how are you going to spend money when you haven't got any to spend?
Well, look, I don't want you to be too depressed. I mean, you're right that if we win the election next Thursday, the inheritance will be very difficult from the Conservatives, whether financially or otherwise. I think people know across the country that the Conservatives have broken Britain and that nothing is working. That means that with a changed Labour Party coming in, having to take the first steps that we've set out in our manifesto to rebuild those foundations and to be able to get Britain building again is going to be our core focus. It will take some time, of course, to turn things around, as anybody would expect. But we've got a strong plan for change for that decade of national renewal. And if people vote for our missions and our manifesto next Thursday by going to the ballot box and voting Labour, we want those missions, those Labour missions, to become national missions so that all of us can get behind them, whether we work in government or in the private sector or in the public sector or the voluntary and third sector, because I think everybody across the country is fed up with Britain not working and they think it's time for change.
But missions are very broad things, aren't they? What people tell us they want is some actual detail. They may want to vote for Labour, but they'd like to know what you're going to do. They'd like you to hear what you say, where you'll get the money. You have been vague on putting up taxes outside of the three you say you won't touch. This is what people are lacking from Labour right now, isn't it?
People can go onto the website, labour.org.uk/change, and see our manifesto set out in detail there. If you go to the back of the manifesto...
Sorry to interrupt. It's not set out in detail there. That's the point. The accusation is there isn't enough detail in the manifesto.
Well, I think there's quite a lot of detail. I mean, it's a manifesto. I was part of writing it. It's, I think, pretty detailed. And I was saying, to answer your question about how our policies are funded, all of them are fully costed and fully funded in that manifesto. So if people go to that manifesto, they look at the back of the book called the grey pages, the fiscal pages. It shows you how, by closing a number of tax loopholes, non-DOMs, VAT on private school fees, the windfall tax on oil and gas companies, we're able to fund our policies. That's in contrast to the Conservative Party manifesto, where the Conservative Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt himself, has confirmed that the money allocated to pay for their promises has already been spent. And as we all know, you can't spend the same pot of money twice.
The thing is, you are also going to inherit the highest tax burden in 70 years, but you're not going to change any of that. So you're going to stick with the cuts that the Conservatives have brought in to national insurance. You are going to stick with that fiscal drag, which, for people who may not be familiar, that is the thresholds for income tax. So more people are, just by virtue of wage inflation, going to get pulled into paying a higher rate of tax. That's not a very Labour thing to do, is it?
Well, look, if we win the election next week, we inherit the country as it is, not as we might like it to be. All of our promises are fully costed and fully funded. That's why we've been able to make a commitment not to increase income tax, national insurance, or VAT for the course of the next Parliament. That's an absolute guarantee from us. But you're right to point out that the thresholds are frozen. We would like to unfreeze them, but of course we have to be able to afford to do so. And we've not done that at this point in the election because the money is not available right now to be able to do that. And that's why when you point to the Conservative Party's promise to change thresholds for certain voters, it's very clear that that's not a promise anyone can believe because the money's not there to pay for their commitments.
We've had in the past year 2 cuts to national insurance of 2p each by the Conservatives. A lot of your supporters would have been happy if national insurance had been left where it was, to pay for things like the NHS, to pay for things like social care. What's the harm in reversing that if you're going to spend the money on making the country better?
Well, because we want to get the balance right. We think, as you've said, the evidence shows the tax burden's the highest it has been for 70 years. We're still in the middle of a cost of living crisis. And the Conservatives have been taxing people more and more and more over the last few years. But for what? We've not seen any vast improvement in our public services, for example. And so we've said, yes, there needs to be an initial injection of capital into frontline public services. That's why we're raising billions of pounds by closing those tax loopholes on non-DOMs and making sure we tax the windfall profits of oil and gas companies effectively to bring money through to our priorities. But in the long run, the answer has to be getting the economy back on track and getting growth back into the economy. That's the only way you can sustainably fund tax cuts for the future, but also funding for public services, alongside a very important job of having to invest in modernise and reform the delivery of public services as well.
Darren Jones, thank you very much indeed. So here are the candidates for the constituency of Bristol North West, as you can see on your screen right now.